Hello there, this is Yana for W+9 and thank you for joining me today. In this video, I'll show you how to quickly create a fun holiday scene combining several stamp sets from W+9. The main stamp set I'll be using today is the All Year Cheer set. This is a great versatile set that you can use all year round. I'll be stamping the two birds from here, and I'll also use the branch and a few other pieces. I'm also going to be using several images from the Be Merry Florals, and finally I'll pick my sentiment from the Strictly Sentiments 6 set. I've already done some test stamping and put one card together using these supplies, and you can see it on the screen right now. So basically, I have a scene with lots of robins sitting on the tree branches and wishing the recipient happy holidays. This is a rather simple card design that doesn't require a lot of supplies and is definitely a fun one to make and mass produce. I'm going to start working on this card by die cutting bird shapes out of white paper. Since there isn't one single stamp to stamp the birds, but rather several individual stamps, I find it easier to die cut the shape out first and then do my stamping. So I'm going to go ahead and die cut a bunch of those to use on my cards. I don't have a specific number, I simply want to have several die cuts for each project. I ended up using 6 birds on one card and 5 birds on the other 2 cards. So you might want to have anywhere from 4 to 6 birds for each of the cards you'll be making. Now here's the negative piece, a leftover piece of paper from my die cutting. I'm not throwing this away, I'm actually going to use it to help me do my stamping faster and to help align my images better. I'm using a mini MISTI stamp positioner. I have my negative piece inside the MISTI with the magnets holding it in place, and I'm going to place the white die cut into the negative space and will position the top part of the bird, the stamp, in place to align it over my die cut. This way I can easily switch my die cuts out and not have to reposition the stamp over the die cut every single time I go to stamp that particular image. This is a huge time saver if you have a stamp positioner like MISTI. Now, if you don't have MISTI, you can by all means still stamp those images. You'll just have to align each one of them separately, where here I only have to align one. I'm going to use several colors of ink to stamp my birds. I'm trying to make them look like robins, so I'm stamping the top part in red and bottom part in light gray. For the top part, I'm using 2 colors of ink from W+9, and this is Cranberry Crush and Gala Red. So I'm quickly stamping all of my birds that face left, and I'm switching between colors and stamping some in lighter red color and some in darker red. By using this method, I don't have to tape my die cuts in place. The negative paper is what's holding everything, and I don't have to worry about my paper moving in my MISTI. But like I said, this can be by all means done using a regular clear block. It will simply take a little longer. To stamp the bellies of my birds, I'm also using 2 colors of ink, and here I have Silver Lining and Fairy Dust. The Fairy Dust is a very faint gray color. It is actually perfect for some shadow stamping, and it looks great here on the bellies of the birds. Silver Lining is a much darker gray, and it adds a nice contrast and a nice variety to these images. I used the same approach and stamped the rest of my birds. I used the exact same colors of ink and did my stamping using MISTI and the negative die cut panels. To complete these images, you'll also need to stamp their feet and faces, and for that I used Coconut Husk ink color. You can also use black, but I was actually avoiding using black for these cards, so I went with a nice dark brown instead. I also switched to a clear block here. I'm no longer using my MISTI. It was just a little faster to stamp these tiny images using a block. Both of the birds have some fun details on their backs, and I stamped 3 tiny red dots on those birds that were facing right. You can also stamp something on those that are facing left, but I decided not to add any additional details. Stamping and die cutting these birds ended up being the most time-consuming part. I think it took me about 20 minutes to die cut and stamp all of these. After I had them ready, I moved on to working on my background. I grabbed a branch image from the All Year Cheer stamp set in Coconut Husk ink and stamped a number of branches onto a panel of white cardstock that was cut to 4¼ by 5½ inches So onto an A2 card front. I rotated my branch image, so some stamped branches are facing up and some are facing down, and even though I used one image, it appears as if I have different branches stamped here. You can also manipulate your stamp and curve it if you'd like to have more variety on your background, but I decided not to do that. I really liked my branches as is. I also used the same color of ink and stamped my sentiment, and one of those sentiments I actually double stamped using my Misty. I would not recommend doing so, as by adding that second layer of ink, you can obliterate the detail on the sentiment. This is such a beautiful and detailed sentiment that I think you only need to stamp it once. Not that I needed to stamp it the second time, it actually stamped perfectly the first. It's just it has become sort of an impulse or a reflex for me to double stamp things. So if you're using the same sentiment that I have here, only stamp it once. Okay, so now that we have our branches done, we can move on to adding some festive details. And this is where I'm going to combine images from two different stamp sets. I'm first using two circles from the All Year Cheer stamp to stamp Christmas ornaments. These are meant to be used as little flowers, but who says we can't stretch our stamps and use them differently? I'm using the exact same colors of ink, so Cranberry Crush and Gala Red, and I'm stamping the large circle using lighter red and the smaller circle using darker red. I will be adding some glitter over the smaller ornaments, and I'll also coat them with some glossy accents. Now I want to add some leaves to this design, and this is where I'll use that other stamp set, Be Merry Florals. When I'm mixing images from different stamp sets, I try to make sure the style of the imagery is the same on all of them. So for example, if I'm using outline images from one set, I will look for outline images in the other set to complement my stamping. If I'm using solid images like I'm doing here, my birds are all solid, my branch is solid, my ornaments are solid, and so I looked for solid leaves. I do sometimes mix solid and outline images on one pattern, but not very often. I also look at the scale of my images. For example, I want my leaves, my branches, and ornaments to look proportional to my birds. I don't want to have giant birds and tiny leaves and vice versa. So this is just something to keep in mind when mixing images from various stamp sets. I'm using Last Leaf ink color to stamp my leaves, and I'm stamping some large and some small leaves here. One additional element I want to add is this berry branch, and I'm stamping this using Cranberry Crush ink color. If you'd like to add more elements to your background, you can stamp some falling snowflakes. There are a few little snowflakes included in the All Year Cheer stamp set. You can also blend some light blue color in the background to help images pop, and I actually did blend W+9 Lakeshores ink onto some of these panels. I used foam adhesive and foam mounted my birds. I originally wanted to have just one bird on one branch, but later decided it would be fun to have bird couples sitting there and singing Merry Christmas. And here I'm using that Lakeshores ink and blending a bit of light blue ink around the panel. Usually I do my ink blending before I foam mount anything, but this was more of an afterthought, so I just blended a little bit of ink to help the pattern pop. Here's the lineup of all three of my panels. The first one here has a lot more of that light blue ink blended over it, and it also already has some glitter added to the smaller ornaments. I went ahead and adhered the other two panels onto A2 top folding cards made out of white cardstock. And I'm now adding a touch of glitter. This is Ranger Stickles glitter glue in Stardust. It would have been better to add red glitter, but I didn't have any, so I added this color instead, and I think it turned out great. Lastly, I'm going to add some glossy accents to the eyes of my birds. This is just something to help them pop. And I'm also adding a coat of glossy to the smaller ornaments that I have stamped on my panels. So this finished my simple stamped holiday scene cards. I hope you like them, and I hope you'll give this idea a try. Thank you so much for joining me today. Be sure to check out W+9 for more creative inspiration. I'll see you next time. Bye!